Hello there, Ian here, and it is really wonderful to be able to be with you. Today we're going to be talking about something called the OODA Loop, and I'll just move myself out of the way there, and then we can see, all right, the OODA Loop and your number one move, the number one skill or the number one approach to making the OODA Loop work well for you. OODA sounds a bit of a strange acronym, but I will go through what it means. I thought, having had a conversation again with the Scaling Up community, I thought it was a good idea to share this with you today. Now, first of all, before we go any further, a shout out to you all. I know that these are unusual times. If you've got your husband or your wife working at home, you've maybe got your children there as well. I know just to my right, the other side of this door, we've got the school playground and the classroom, and we've got two offices functioning for my wife and I. So, hey, if you're in this in that situation, really, props to you, and well done for keeping it going. Okay, so it is a new ball game. It is a new ball game, and it's a new approach right now. But when we come out of this, we will be at another phrase that is becoming that we're hearing a lot is the new normal. So we're at a stage where we were sort of at the end of last year, beginning of this year, and what we've learned is that these changes, if they're big enough, we never go back to how we were before. The change will take us in one direction or another, depending on where we are to begin with. There's a change, but we will, as a result of that change, not be where we were before. We'll be either here, or we'll be here or here when things return to not normal, but a steady state in the future. So it is a new ball game, and it will emerge differently. But here are four what I call magic words to help us in this time, to get us through this current situation. And the four magic words are: this too shall pass. Now, my mother was born in the war years, the Second World War years, and she has some memories of the actual time of war, being marched down into the back garden to go into the air raid shelter that my grandfather had dug in the back garden, that we were told that you had to do in those days. She remembers that, and she also remembers the post-war years of rationing, where the shops would only give a certain amount of flour, butter, sugar, meat to each family. You would go in with your ration book, and they would mark down how many pounds and ounces of each of these provisions you were allowed to have, and that included coal as well for the fire. My grandfather, my father's father, even kept a small amount of livestock in the back garden that he would then use to trade with the neighbours. So when you got your supplies, you could use to trade them, of course, with other families, but you were only allowed a certain amount at the shops. And that might not be a bad idea here, but we're not at that stage yet. So this too shall pass. It might be difficult now. It is difficult now, but we will get to a new normal. We will actually progress through this. So here are some tools to help us. And before we get into the OODA acronym, your number one move. Now, when I mentioned this, I think last week when I shared some ideas, number one move is to talk. It is really hard to think our way out of a crisis. It's really hard to sit there on our own and think about how we get through this on our own. What is the best course of action that we take? It's much more effective and much faster to talk. And while we're on that subject of trying to think ourselves out of a crisis, trying to think ourselves into a more positive mindset is also hard. Motion leads to emotion. If we sit there and try and think positive, it's actually quite difficult to do. If you move your physical body, that can create positive emotions a lot faster and more effectively than trying to think ourselves positive. And you can try this. If you're up for this challenge, yeah, you can stop the video and give it a try. But if you look at the floor, hunch your shoulders over, look at the floor and make a really ugly face, make a really distorted face, put your tongue out and make a really grumpy looking ugly face. Hunch your shoulders and look at the floor. If you're in that position, then try and feel happy. Try and feel joy when you're in that position. If you gave that a try, then stand up. Put your shoulders back slightly. Stand up nice and tall and straight. Shoulders back at a comfortable position. Raise your chin maybe slightly and smile. Smile a big cheesy grin on your face. And in that posture, try and feel miserable. Try and feel really down and grumpy. If you gave it a try, my bet is that when you're in the hunch position, it was hard to feel happy and positive. When you're in the smiling upright position, it was really hard to feel down and miserable. So use those two techniques. Talk to your teammates and your advisors and coaches if you have them. Talk on a regular basis to those people. And when you approach those conversations, put yourself in a good physical state and you'll have better conversations. So I hope that makes sense. So with that in mind, let's move on to the OODA acronym and what it actually means. Now this thing called, I'll just move myself out of the way there. This thing was codified. The guy that's credited with codifying OODA is a guy called John Boyd, or Commander John Boyd. He was a test pilot, some say one of the best test pilots ever. And he codified this OODA decision-making process. And it can be used for anything. I think a particular application that he used it for was in military combat, in dog fighting, to try and outmaneuver his opponent. Let's look at what it means for us, particularly in this current situation. So the first O is observe. Observe the information and the situation that's around you. Now, all of this stuff is information. Now, here is our first thing that we must do. Put myself there. We must do is look at the information dispassionately, without judgment. And for some of us, that's tricky because if we have a preconceived notion in our heads about what things mean, when we get information, we look for the information that supports our preconceived notion. And that can be dangerous. If someone that we trust has given us some information, we tend to assume that information is true or valuable. It could be wrong, but we have a preconceived idea because we trusted the person that gave us the information. So beware. Information is simply that. At this first O of the loop, we just want to take the information as it is and not judge it. Okay, so that is the first O. The second O of OODA is orient ourselves. And this means asking that question, what does that mean for me? This is the information. Where do I sit in light of this information? Now, this is probably where we are now in this unfolding COVID-19 virus crisis. We've been through the sort of observe stage. Some of us, it's been a bit of a shock to the system, having to reorient our family and our work lives. But now we're in the orientation phase. We're thinking now, what does this mean for us? Where do we sit in the context of this information? And for companies, what some good things to think about are, what are our core strengths? What have we always been good at? What can we really leverage right now in order to emerge from this current situation? What do we need to get rid of or not do anymore? Where do we need to focus? What kind of people do we need to get us into this new way of working? So that's the orientation phase. And by the way, yes, it's probably where we are now in terms of the unfolding crisis. It's also the most important stage of the OODA loop. And if you can think of it as a diagnosis, when you come in to the hospital and the doctors don't know what's wrong with you, they have to observe the information. How you feel, where the pain is, what your temperature is, what your vital signs are. Then they have to orient themselves around, what does that mean? What's the interpretation of that data? Okay, so that's another way to look at it, but it's probably where we are now, and it is the most important part of the OODA loop. So where do we go from here? The next bit is, of course, we have to decide. We have to take that information in context and then decide what we do. Now, what is our best option? If we've done a really good orientation, we have some very good decision candidates. We may have more than one, but if we've done a good orientation, we've got some really good candidates for what may be our best decision. And I put in this little slide here just to remind ourselves of playing chess. Now, I am not a very good chess player. I know how to move the pieces around, but I would not consider myself a good chess player. But the reason that I put this in was some research was done on the difference between a grandmaster chess player and a master chess player. There aren't too many grandmasters in the world. And some research was done on what makes a grandmaster rather than just a master. And the prevailing theory was that a grandmaster could see a higher number of moves into the future. The research determined that that was not the case. The key thing that determined a grandmaster from a master was the quality of their moves. They could see the same number of moves. So a master and a grandmaster could see the same number of moves into the future, by and large, but it was the grandmaster's ability to make a better move about 4 times as often as his opponent. So it wasn't being able to see farther into the future, it was making a better quality move. And just to go back to orientation, if you've done a really, really good orientation, you can then make a better quality move. All right? So I hope that that made sense. And moving along, of course, then we have to act. The final A in OODA, O-O-D-A, A is for act. We have to do something. Now, when we do something, we always have to be testing. So we act, we do something, and then we test, particularly if this action is something new or it's a new variation on what we've done in the past. Every new action always requires some test criteria to see if it works. It's good practice. So I really hope that that did make sense. And you may be thinking, well, that's kind of common sense. We look at the information, we interpret the information, we decide what to do, and then we do something, we act. Yeah, it may seem like common sense, but to actually break it down into its component parts is useful to help us make better quality decisions. And of course, when we act, it's called the OODA Loop, because when we act, we have new information. If we're testing, we've got some feedback, we have new information. So I really hope that that did make sense. Remember, panic is contagious, but so is leadership. Yeah, and more than ever before, your team, your tribe, your families are looking for leadership now more than ever. So I really hope that that did make sense, and hang in there for all of us that are facing this new challenge. It's temporary, and as always, keep scaling, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.